My name is Joshua Gibson, and you are listening to the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast, a show dedicated to promoting a message of critical thinking as it pertains to strength training, nutrition, and well-being. This is done through interviews with experts, high-level athletes, coaches, and people heavily involved in strength sports and athletic development. Pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and let's get on to today's podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Gibson. Today I'm joined by Jeremy Hartman. How's it going, Jeremy?
Hey, going well, Josh. Thanks so much for inviting me to be on this. Looking forward to having a great discussion and a podcast with you.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is you're actually at school now, so you work in a variety of schools, and you act as kind of the S&C coach, I guess, or part of the S&C staff. So maybe we could start the podcast by you just really giving us a look into how you got into the strength and conditioning world, and that'll kind of lead into all of the powerlifting accolades and all that stuff.
Yeah, you know how I got started. I was very fortunate. I think I was one of the most fortunate kids in America, if not the world, as cliche as that sounds. But I had a great coach who started me off in sixth grade with strength conditioning. I started me off with sled work before it was even popular. He was a metal fabricator by trade, and somebody had helped his kid out, and he saw the benefits of early strength training. He was getting a lot of European textbooks about how to help raise wrestlers, and so one of the things was the strength training on there, and he got us started early with sled pushes and pulls, farmers walks, bleacher runs with weights in our hands, a lot of sprint work, pull-ups everywhere, rope pulls, rope climbs, you name it, he did it. And that was one of the first things I got introduced. And man, those 4 years of base building, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, as I actually hit the barbell lifts, mine just took off where everybody's went up slowly. It's because I had 4 years of this base building of all this athletic stuff that was thrown at me. And I didn't even know. Everyone's asking me how much you bench, and they're like, what do you do? And I was like, man, I push and pull sleds. I do all this other crazy stuff, plyo push-ups on and off chairs, and this wrestling style training. My body just ate up the barbell lifts as I got into it.
Yeah. And then you've obviously adapted that. And just for people listening, they're always curious. And one of the questions I even like to ask for people who, you're a multiple time national champion in the USAPL, IPF world level medalist. Very, very successful. When you started touching the barbell movements, what kind of weights were you putting up? Just, to give us an idea of kind of where you started, what that GPP base developed, and then we can even go into where you ended and kind of like your all-time PR lifts.
Yeah. Where I started, didn't have much of a high school program at first. And the guy that was training me as I got into high school, I wasn't being able to be around him as much because of high school practice, high school commitment. But then I got hooked up with another great coach, Vic Voinovich, who really showed me the proper way of techniques and everything on lifts. So my lifting, it didn't start like spectacular where I just took off, but it started slowly getting better, and it started making bigger jumps than everybody else around me. Everybody was like, man, how are you doing this? Or how are you making these jumps every few weeks? It's number one, you're young. But like you said, 4 years of that base building stuff that I had all the developmental tools ready to start hitting the heavy weights as I matured. And Vic Voinovich started teaching me the power lifts as far as a low bar squat, proper front squats, both styles of deadlift, conventional and sumo. Sumo especially very heavy for me being a wrestler and needing the hips and hamstring work on there. And, teaching me how to arch on my bench press to set my shoulders, and talking about shoulder injuries and all this little stuff that I didn't know. So he started me off in more or less 10th grade when I really got the training. And then it took off. And, man, my wrestling confidence went through the roof. I was able to finally handle these 18, 19-year-old kids I was wrestling, when before you're still getting beat up, even though I was pretty strong for where I was at. But, man, the barbell lifts just took it, and I couldn't get enough of training. I loved everything that we were doing. I love wrestling the sport. It's still such a big part for today. But the training, man, I fell in love with the process. It was just amazing what it did for my speed, my strength, my athleticism, and everybody else around me. They just couldn't believe it. And it was just, man, that 4 years of base building that Mr. Conjan gave me. And from there, I had some scholarship offers, just a couple D1 schools, mostly Division II and III. And I just fell in love with lifting so much. I talked to Vic, and he goes, hey, we got to get you involved with powerlifting, because he knew Louis Simmons a little bit. And so I said, all right, let's get started on this. I don't want to wrestle in college. And man, we just took off. And within 2 years, I'd won my first 18, 19-year-old national title. And I was like, okay, this sport's like, this is for me, man. This is legit. This is what I want to do. So as I went through, we won the 18, 19-year-olds and then won that 2 years in a row. And it's time to step on the collegiate level scene. And here I am in college. There was no club team, no anything around. Everything was all on me. So I went through and just ripped through collegiates and juniors at the time and was a 4-time undefeated national champion all the way through, made 2 U.S. world teams. Got my first taste in 2003 in Poland, got to travel and compete internationally. Lost by 2.5 kilos to place top 3 in the world, something that I still get upset about and think about today. But came back, met Sherman Ledford from Quest Nutrition, who was a great guy, great mentor. As far as when I was competing, we had single-ply equipment only. There really wasn't any raw divisions. You only had one division to see. And I had to learn more about the equipment. And Vic was still helping me, but Sherman kind of brought me to a new level with the equipment and actually taught me how to get stuff out of it. And lo and behold, 2005, I finished top 3 in the world. It was on. And then, I graduated from college. I was the best lifter at the Collegiate Nationals, set a lot of American records along the way. And from there, I went in the open division. And my first year out, man, I got beat bad by Jason Beck. Jason Beck should have been a world champion. He ended up being a bronze medalist, ended up getting sick at Worlds. But he beat me by 88 pounds in my first actual men's open division. And that was pretty humbling because you're used to winning and used to dominating. And now, there's no more age groups. It's the open, really, who's the best of the best. And then I came back the next year, and it was even tougher. I had 3 former national champions all in my weight class, and I wasn't picked to be it. And it came down to our last deadlift, and I had actually injured myself a few weeks before and actually even contemplated not even going because my deadlift wasn't there, and that's what I could usually count on to pull out the victories in a meet. But luckily I was a coach at the time, and, I thought, what would I have told my kids? I would have told them to suck it up and get out there and do your best, and went out there and ended up pulling and tying the guy and won on body weight, won my first men's open national title. Yeah. And then, the confidence built up, and I was just right back to where I started, man. And I went to Worlds that year and got benched 523 pounds, got a bronze medal in the world. And then, of course, my deadlift, that's what I was most famous for. And I pulled 782, and this is in 220-pound weight class back then, gold medal in the world. And the highest you can get in powerlifting is called the World Games, which happen every 4 years. In the off year of the Olympics, and that's where you actually represent the sport itself along with your country. And, got to go out there and represent the United States of America and the actual sport of powerlifting. And they combined 2 different weight classes with a Wilks formula. I ended up finishing 7th out of 12th. It wasn't my best showing, but got to go to Taiwan for a whole week. And that was the first time you felt like a real international, level athlete with the way they took care of you, the way you got accommodations and everything else. And, so it was 6 national titles, 3 U.S. world teams, obviously the World Games competition, winning those medals at the IPF Worlds when I almost didn't even go to nationals. And, it was just a nonstop spree all the way from there. I went to the Arnold, competed at the best deadlifters twice, ended up finishing 4th out there. And at 216, just missed a 789 deadlift that would have brought me to top 2 in the U.S. by body weight versus weight lifted. And then I got into coaching after that.
Yeah, it's always really tough to ask this question with someone who not only did it really, really well, but did it what seems like the right way. Is there anything so when you look back on your competitive career as a powerlifter, is there anything you wish you would have known or done differently? Or did it all it seemed like it all kind of lined up the right way. And it was very successful, but is there anything you would have done differently or changed?
Yeah, I had some more opportunities. So I had to seek out a lot of my own coaches. Vic and Sherman, they really helped me out a lot. I used to be a frequent visitor to Louis Simmons down at Westside, and Louis was fine. He'd never said anything about me being a USA powerlifter. He graded me more on strength. That's what he connects people as down there. So he was very helpful because I was from Cleveland, Ohio, and every time you open a Powerlifting USA, all you saw was Westside Barbell articles and Louis Simmons articles. And the guy who I trained with, was connected with through him. Did a little bit of training because he had some fighters that were going through. And so I was like, all right, well, this is where I guess the best powerlifters are. So I started getting a lot of tips, and Louis was always very helpful, took me out to breakfast for free, trained me for free, helped me out while I was down there. I had several other world team members, Wade Hooper, one of the best squatters in the United States of America at all time. He was my roommate for several years on world teams. Wade squatted over 800 pounds at 181 body weight in single ply gear and squatted over 700 pounds raw. So I got a lot from him. I think looking back on my career, I had some opportunities that I wish I would have taken, as far as I should have spent some more time with Wade, because my squat was holding me back from placing higher at the world championships. I'm squatting 733 in gear at 220, and I'm still having a 650 to 675 raw squat. I just wasn't getting enough out of the gear for that. I wish I would have trained with Wade a little more, because he was very versed in that, and he could have helped me out. And then I wish I would have taken a chance to go to Norway. I tell all my kids this all the time. That's why they're not allowed to, if an opportunity comes up, even though I took advantage of a lot of them. The coach from Norway, Detmar Wolf at the time, he had a guy that beat me, and we talked a lot about training, because we didn't have official coaches in the United States or club teams, kind of like they do with Olympic weightlifting, and they do in a few countries with powerlifting. So I wish I would have taken advantage of taking a 2-week trip out there and spent some time learning his system a little more to help me with that squat. So if you look at that, and my kids hear this all the time, that's why they're not allowed to have any regrets. They have to learn from my mistakes and go forward.
Yeah. And then kind of the flip side of that question, what would you change? What, in your opinion, was your favorite moment of your competitive career? I mean, you listed quite a few that were, really, really high up there, but is there one that kind of sticks out as the entirety of the situation, maybe even the placing, but it's just, every time you think back on it, it's like, man, that was the pinnacle of it.
Yeah, the pinnacle is not being a quitter, and when I could have easily not gone to nationals, because here I am, I got 3 former national champions, all guarding in my weight class to see who's going to be the best and make the U.S. world team. And here I am, 2-3 weeks out, I got a serious injury, I had sustained just to my lower back. And part of it was with the strength conditioning I was doing with the kids, and then obviously with my own training at the same time. And, I'm barely able to, pull what I needed to. I'm 50, 60 pounds below what I need to. And you're talking about nationals coming down to the wire, which it actually did for me. I had to pull to tie the guy and win on body weight. And I was really contemplating not going. I didn't want to go out there and embarrass myself, but it's like, what would I have done? And the guy that I was training with, Gabe Daniels at the time, only guy I trained with that was stronger than me ever. He said the same thing. He goes, dude, what would you have told your kids? He goes, you got to go. So, I decided the last minute. And I knew I was going to go. It's just, it was very humbling at the time. And this is something when you're trying to peak out and every freaking kilo and pound counts. And then this stuff happens. You got 3 former national champs. I just decided to go out there. I rested as best I could. I deadlifted what I could. I got massage work, chiropractic work, took advantage of every little thing, called everybody I could think of. Dick Hartzell, who's the rubber band man, helped me out with some traction stuff too. I mean, I pulled out all the stops that I could to make sure I was 100% that day. And then on top of that, after I pulled my opening deadlift, we were in a good place. And so it was like we came there to get first. I didn't care about being second or anything. We actually jumped up 90 pounds because we skipped my second attempt deadlift. And here's something I've never done before. And we're like, hey, we're jumping up. I think it was like, 90, right around 90 pounds from the first to the third. We skipped the second one. And, I didn't care. I trusted my coaches, Josh Rohr, James Townsend, Sherman Ledford in my corner. And I said, whatever we need to do, we're here for it. And went out there and pulled in spectacular fashion and could have done more and tied the guy and ended up winning on body weight, and then ended up beating him the next 3 times I faced him to make sure that I solidified. So, yeah. And so I think just not quitting it and telling my kids, no matter what, you finish and you see everything through. And that is a constant reminder to this day, because I almost had the same thing happen to me in wrestling. I had a great coach that helped me out with the same thing and, taught me never to quit. And when it's always darkest before dawn. And that was a true testament to my wrestling and a true testament to this, because I would have never gone to Worlds. I would have never placed at Worlds. I never would have, been a world champion deadlifter, a bronze medalist, made the, World Games team, because that only happens once every 4 years. So I don't care what happens to anybody. I make sure all my athletes see everything all the way through, because I'm a testament to that.
Mm. Do you feel like the psychological components is a bit undervalued in like the strength sport world? I know people talk about like getting bigger and sport specificity and frequency and intensity and all these things, but you don't oftentimes hear about them talking about kind of the mindset to last, not 1 year, not 5 years, but 10 years, 15 years, and to continually stay not necessarily in peak shape, but at the top, right?
Yep.
Takes a different kind of mindset. Maybe you could just go into how, I don't know if you developed that or it was just something that you felt like you had from the jump, but how that kind of set you apart.
Yeah, it was something developed through my coaches. That's why I try to be the best coach I can today. It was developed all the way through the wrestling, hearing, going to camps and hearing Olympic champions talk about, they never had an easy process. But I've never talked to a champion that's had something easy, didn't have injuries, didn't have stuff at adversity or constant adversity they've had to go through over and over again. So there is a huge psychological part, because I've seen people that could have been great, they quit, or they're like you've seen it. They come in and they're just on the scene for a few years and like, wow, and then all of a sudden, they're gone. So you got to learn to fight through stuff. You got to learn to work around, when injuries and adversity comes up, in your personal life and everything else. You got to learn to block stuff out and just stay focused on it. But there is a psychological part, because there was a time, gosh, for a year and a half, I wasn't getting any PRs. And I'm in my 20s, early 20s. What kid does not get PRs in their 20s? Their peak of their testosterone level and everything. And as far as development and still maturity. And I was going through a bad spot. And luckily I had guys like Sherman Ledford and some other coaches around me said, we're going to get through this. And they gave me some other programs and, invited me to come in down and train with them and kind of get back in order. So that is something that you just develop, and you got to reach out to people and talk to other champions about it and realize you're not the only one, and don't feel sorry for yourself that, you'll get through, and it's just part of the process all the way through. And, after a year and a half, the thing I had to show was like a 7.5 kilo PR on my deadlift, but man, that set me up for future success, and it just took off from there.
Yeah. And I guess you could kind of go into the system that you have set up now, because you work with kids from all age groups, and you kind of get to intervene when they're in the earliest stages of development and probably the most malleable or changeable, and communicating not only the mindset, but also, the training that will set them up for later success is really, really important, because powerlifting, weightlifting, both sports that rely on people coming in from other backgrounds, athletic backgrounds, CrossFit, other sports, they come in at a later age, and it's a pretty rough transition, because maybe they did play a sport, maybe they didn't, maybe they just came in off the couch and they come in their early 20s. But when you get to work with kids from a younger age, I think you get to see the system through and see the process through. So how has that changed has that changed at all your outlook to kind of the training process or the training system? And how do you make sure you set those kids up for success?
Yeah, this where I was at first, Franklin Community High School down near Indianapolis, Indiana. That was the first time I've been able to put a full system into place, where it was 100% on me. And that's where I got all three of my girls from. I have 3 IPF gold medalists in the deadlift. I have 9 world records. We have over 50 United States American records, well over 100 state records, all from one small gym and one small development. And I had these girls, they joke around. They wish we would have started this earlier, but at the time I was just starting the high school program up before I got down to middle school. And I started them all with athletic lifts. Before they got into the gym, they were out for probably 4 weeks with PVC pipes, learning movements, squats, wall squats I had them do. We were learning standing bench presses, how to do a lunge, you name it, just fundamental lifts, like before they even were allowed to be in the weight room. This went for all my guys and my girls and for all my athletes that I was training, because I was in charge of, I probably had 400 or 500 athletes, every day that I would physically see. So I started a system like that. And once they got better, I made, the administration realized that I needed a freshman only lifting class. I needed these separate. They needed to be brought in at a certain level at the current spot I was in, starting just like I said with the high school program. So I kept my freshmen separate and I brought them along, add weight every week, improvement techniques, number one. But like I said, they all started. God, I had groups of 80 kids out there with PVC pipes, all learning stuff. And, you come from an Olympic background, the movements. God, I go to Olympic meets and there's still people practicing with a broomstick and, warming up with that stuff. So that's where I stole it from. I just adapted it to a higher level of kids, and they were learning stuff. They were learning overhead squats. I gave them a lot of stuff that was simple, but, they'd never been exposed to it. And as I brought our system and our athletes and our athletics, took off. Same thing I did at Carroll High School, Fort Wayne. I just had a little more experience and a little more, mindset about what I wanted to do. And from there, my girls were, they had an athletic background. All my girls that were IPF world champions, USAPL national champions. I was the only coach to have 3 girls from the same gym, the same hometown, make the U.S. world team for powerlifting and the U.S. world team for benching in the same calendar year. You'll see a lot of other coaches. They have kids, or people they recruit from all over. They have so-and-so's working with me now, but they're already at a high level. It doesn't take that hard to coach a champion. I could sit in Michael Phelps' corner and probably coach him to gold medal in swimming, But to actually develop stuff, that's what I take for, and that's what I look for in a lot of coaches. And we developed a system. And as they got, their athletics were great. They're all varsity athletes. All three of my girls, they're actually a grade below each other. It's funny, from Shelby Miles to Jenica Ballridge to Chloe Dublin. They're all voted female athletes of the year. They're all on varsity. Chloe going to state and track and field. Shelby being a tennis and volleyball player. Jenica doing the same thing, and until they decide they want to go to powerlifting full time. But that system was critical, from starting with PVC pipes, teaching them fundamental athletic weight room lifts. Nothing complicated. But when you got large groups, you got to be a little more creative on there. From there, they had a freshman only weights class, which I took them through an entire year. They have to be in front of me. It's not like they can skip out. 4 days a week, they are in front of me for a good 50 minutes. So I had them every single time. Plus, you got them in the summers, and sometimes you lost some kids, but those ones stayed with me. And then from there, I kept my 10th through 12th graders in a class together. And by then, they kind of knew the movements, and they could all compete and start really going after it. But being a high school strength coach, you're still going to teach the fundamentals over and over again. And we just developed some tremendous athletes just right out of that system.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny you say that, because I remember having a conversation with a great coach, and I told him, like, I will know that I made it when I'm able to build someone from the ground up and make them a national champion. And for you have world level athletes and medalists and record holders. So I mean, that's just the mark of a fantastic coach, in my opinion. Now, a couple of questions, I guess, from that would be, how do you handle such big groups? And then also, how do you work on, I mean, what does the training look like once they're in that freshman class and they're kind of, after the technical side of things have started to come along, and you're actually incorporating, lifting weights? How do you handle big groups? And then what does the programming for, really ranked beginner athletes look like?
Yeah. Well, for handling big groups, everybody's got to have something. So you can't all give kids bars. You're not going to have enough 15-pound bars, aluminum bars. So that's why I said everybody got a PVC pipe. I got that from Mike Bergner as well, great Olympic weightlifting coach whose family and programs are very good. Mike was a high school strength coach. And I had, 80 kids in there, and I lined them all up. Everybody had a pipe. And, I'll give you box squats. Here's how I handled that group. To teach kids actually hip hinge, besides doing RDL, it's like to actually teach them to sit back. We pulled out all the bottom bleachers all across the entire gym. And I had 80 kids all box squatting at once and on a microphone. And kids, I didn't care if it was high bar or low bar yet. I just needed them to learn to sit back, load up their glutes and hamstrings, and not just fall down into a squat with knees tracking over their toes and heels coming up. So all 80 kids were box squatting, and they were doing it on the whistle. They were doing it on voice commands that I was on a loud microphone inside of a field house gym. So you had 80 kids squatting all together, and I'd rush them all back into the middle, give them a couple points. I had a box set up in the center. I'd rush them all back out. And I had some sport coaches at the time. The wrestling coach was helping me out, and a few others that were also starting to learn my system too. And then for bench press, I'd stand up in the middle, and we would all do a standing bench press with the PVC pipes. We learned how to keep our elbows in, how to stay straight. We'd put the pipe vertical behind our back, and we would do our lunges. So they actually learned what it meant to have a vertical back position while you're doing a lunge. RDLs, oh man, that's a big hip hinger that I love. That's part of my, when you're asking me as far as handling groups and my philosophy big on, teaching them an RDL. Teaching them about not having your heels come up and knees over your toes. When you're doing military presses or even overhead squats, that way every kid's practicing, not just a bunch of 4 or 5 kids standing around. Every kid is moving from there. And, they did that for, a good 4 or 5 weeks before I started bringing them in the weight room and teaching them with bars. But again, I kept those kids separate. As far as my freshman class, we just kind of went from the summer program, and obviously you're not going to get all the kids in. I'm sorry, at the high school level, it's not a collegiate level where, they have to, 100% be there, and you still have to have buy-ins from parents, and there's a whole bunch of other excuses. But my freshman class, we just continued on. I showed them Olympic lifts. We at that level, we were just sticking overhead squats and cleans. I didn't want to start complicating them too much, and they were learning a standing military press. It's simple development. From there, we learned a push press. From there, we learned just a push jerk. I didn't even do a split jerk or anything with them. I just wanted to teach them to use their whole body, learn to push under a bar and jump under and catch it. And the flexibility and the mobility and stuff you get from ankles and hips with the Olympic lifts, you just can't beat. Especially, I think, for a young kid who's, they're so lacking in those areas. And you'll get more flexibility training out of them for that. So the freshman class was very simple. And I just kept with simple Bill Starr's 5x5 routine. He's one of the first strength conditioning coaches of all time. And we just kept simple with that. And then, as the kids progressed and our technique was good, they were allowed to move up in weight. And then probably after the first, so they had all summer, then they had the first 9 weeks. Then we started recording lifts on there. And we just kept with simple linear periodization, high reps to low reps. And I let the kids do some testing on there, but they knew if they're backgrounded or, it was bad technique or they were, whatever, they weren't allowed to lift it. And that was just me going over and over again. And I guess for the class, when you're dealing with people in a phys ed class, you only have 50 minutes. Everything was set up in stations, except for maybe like a main lift. And I was blessed; I had over a 5,000 square foot weight room. So I think I had, 10 squat racks, 10 benches, and 10 half racks. So you put 3 kids at each one of those. You got 90 kids I could set up on an organized program. Everything was off a timer to keep kids accountable. Every kid would lift minute on the minute. So if we're doing squats, benches, cleans that day, the minute hit, the next person went. Then they had a minute to switch their weights, a little bit of break, then the next person went. So that's how I stayed all the kids on there. And I got that from a strength conditioning coach at University of North Carolina, my buddy Wes Erlocker, who's an assistant coach there, as far as trying to keep athletes accountable in large groups. Now, assistance work, I would just give them a timer. So you had say we're doing something simple like lunges or step ups or, Bulgarian split squats or pull ups. They just had 7 minutes at a station. But for all main lifts, it was minute on the minute. Everybody started at the same time. Everybody finished at the same time. Everybody got all their sets and reps. And with a high school setting, I'm probably the most accountable coach there is that I've ever come across with that. So that's how I handled them with, when you could still get 40. God, I was getting 40 to, there were some classes of 70 kids during the school day, in a 50-minute phys ed class. But everything was we warmed up together. They got their speech. They went to their stations. We lifted every minute on the minute. Everybody started when the timer hit. Everybody finished when the timer hit. From there, we'd break off into our assistance work. And, I just had, hey, this group's over here. This group's over here. This group's over here. You got 7 minutes to get all your lunges in. Or if you're doing pull-ups over here, you got dumbbell work in. And we just rotated through there. And that's how you have to handle large groups of kids. Set a timer up. They have to go when it dings. They have to stop, rest, switch the weights. And you just got to plug it in from there.
Wow. I mean, I think that's incredible. And I don't know, the kids probably don't think this, but that would have been an honor to be brought into a program that is so well established and so systematic and so focused on development, right? Because I think a lot of high schools, at least the ones I've seen, the one I was even in, it was just kind of, I mean, there wasn't a rhyme or reason to it, to be honest. I remember going in the first day of football and pulling 315 on a hex bar, and it was terrible, and no one said a word about it. So I think that kind of lends credence to your attention to detail and to development. I mean, what do you think it would take to get programs around the U.S. like this, where it's so systematized? I mean, it seems like a lot of work, but the success is evident.
Yeah, it was, but unfortunately, I left that position because when you get into that level and you're pushing kids to do their very best, and once you get this system established, the parent involvement and sometimes, unfortunately, the administration has to be bought in as well. So it's never going to be perfect. And as great as it sounds, that's the stuff that unfortunately, and when I talk to my other friends that are high school strength coaches, I see it in the schools year round. You and I always read about a coach getting fired or crazy stuff happening. With high school coaches all year round because of that. And it's very unfortunate at the level that we're at with the high schools that, satisfaction from the outside, besides the winning and stuff like that, it doesn't matter. Unfortunately, at the high school level, it's funny now. You can see a lot of coaches, they're not winning very good and they're not doing very well, but because they're liked more, uh, their jobs are perfectly fine versus someone who's doing well, but not as liked as on that part. So it's an unfortunate part of it. And that was one of the reasons I had a better opportunity at a different school because they wanted to take this program and go even further. I wanted a middle school program. I wanted to have these kids the best opportunity to succeed, and that's why I left for one of the top schools in the state of Indiana and one of the top schools in the nation now for public education and high school sports. And we've got another system developed over here.
Yeah, and it sounds like you really are, again, building kids from the ground up. At what age do they start to, when I say specialize, maybe that's not necessarily just squat, benching, and deadlift, kind of like a Bulgarian where it's multiple times a day, multiple days a week. But when do they start to turn the corner and say, okay, powerlifting is where the focus is. Let's actually make a run to the top.
Well, I guess for my girls, my top three, and I had a lot of other kids too, but the commitment was too high. And I didn't charge my kids anything for the stuff that I was doing. Heck, I was paying a lot of my own stuff for travel with them because this was their reward for doing real well. As I started, teaching them, more like sumo deadlifts and conventional deadlifts as they went through like ninth and 10th grade year, I just saw people taking a higher level interest. The kids were buying in, man, I'm feeling faster in my sport. Man, I'm feeling greater out there. Now I'm going against these 18-year-old kids and I'm 15, 16. And I'm feeling better now. Before I was getting my butt kicked. And so the kids just that showed a high level of interest, I brought them in an extra. I said, hey, Fridays after school, for all that are in my lifting class, I said, we're going to have a little bit extra and we're going to focus more on deadlifting. And then they started coming in. And I said, all right, we're going to take you. I just took them to a local competition, which ended up being really good. They actually had over 300 kids at this, non-sanctioned low level, and the kids did well. I said, okay, it's time for an official sanctioned meet. And, I had kids start breaking records and qualifying for nationals, and then kids start winning some hardware over there. And then, only a few remained as far as with that commitment year round. So it was just something that once they saw that high level, and it takes a while to honestly to make it where I'm going to put a lot of time and effort into a kid, because of just from all the years of coaching, you get a lot of kids that they'll switch on you, when something else comes up, or kind of like the dog with a bone in its mouth, they'll drop it to try to find something better. But yeah, it was going from local competitions and just telling them like, hey, this is how it is. If you guys are going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and they all had to all be in my lifting class, and they all had to come in extra on top of that for extra lifts. And, we just kind of built it up from there.
As someone who's been around a lot of kids, worked with a lot of kids, developed a lot of athletes, when you meet someone or when you work with someone for a short period of time, can you tell if they kind of have that drive or that commitment, or is it something that over the course of years, it's just like whoever kind of ends up, in the weight room in 3 years will be the person who wants to continue on? Or do you kind of notice a difference um, earlier on in their commitment and their kind of inability to quit?
Both. Some kids, I was exposed to this earlier on, and a lot of kids aren't exposed to this, and they don't have, a lot of the high school coaches, unfortunately, I find myself being one of the most committed ones um, to it. But I guess at that level, it's hard to say, and I want to say both to your answer, because you'll see some that gravitate towards you right away, and you'll see some that, man, they love it, or they've had experience, or maybe their parents brought them to the weight room, or they did some CrossFit stuff and at least have an idea of what it is, or they brought up in a competitive environment, and I see that all the time. And so some of the ones get it right away. Some of the ones I've had some great soccer players. I had some great goalies, some great people that it took them a couple years to buy into it. And then once they got success, once they started really maybe maturing a little bit, and their lift started taking off, and like, oh my God. And, hey, I went from, not even close to varsity. Now I'm the varsity starter, or, kids that have to step up from before, or kids that had injuries. And the trainer and I worked together with them to get them back and showed them like, hey, you keep pulling your hamstrings, you got to get these stronger. You can't sit there and just stretch your life away with these. It's not going to work. And once we get them going again, they buy into the weight room more. And unfortunately, so you see the kids that come up first. Yes, so some have it right away. It's a lot of it's due to their background, or they just gravitate towards me. Others, usually by a couple years, that's been my mark that I've personally seen. Usually by a couple years in the weight room with me, that they've kind of bought in and they have that drive. And then others, unfortunately, you got to fight all the time to do their best. And Urban Meyer even talked about that when he won a national title in his book. And he said, you got the, I forget what percentages he used. You got the, less than 10% that are 100% bought in. You don't really have to worry about them. And you got the middle pack that, gosh, you're constantly bringing them up. And then you got the ones behind that, sometimes just need a cut.
Interesting. And then maybe we can even just quickly talk about the development of athletes who come later in life. So, I mean, you're a coach. I'm sure you get people from all age brackets who want to compete in powerlifting. You have a system that's developed for kids you get from a younger age and are able to work with one-on-one, spend a lot of time with. But that's, really different and starkly different than the kind of remote coaching world that we're kind of in right now, where people can just sign up and then it's sending videos, and it's so far removed from hands-on and like daily accountability. How does your approach or how does your system change when you get someone who's in their early 20s, but they want the same thing, even if they're in another state or, a few hours away? I mean, I'm sure that changes things a lot.
Yeah, it does tremendously because I made some early mistakes on that because I tried to bring them up through my system. It's just they're too far forward. They've got too many ways they deadlift. Like I'll give you an example from personal experience. I used to train with Vincenello, who's the first deadlifter ever in the history of powerlifting or strength training to deadlift over 800 while weighing under 200. Vincenello. Yeah, if you look him up, gosh, Vince pulled like 880 back at 220-pound body weight in the 70s with a stiff bar, a leather belt, no real powerlifting equipment. So when I got into work with him and stuff, Vince pulled a slight rounded back, and I tried neutral spine and head down and all the functional fluff that's out there. And mine was actually better with a slight rounded upper back and a tight lower back. That just fit my body type better because I gravitated towards that for my body structure. But if you look at my lifters have the best technique in the world, and they've all been complimented on it. I got Shelby Miles, my 22-year-old girl who weighs 200 pounds. She's pulling close to 500 pounds on here, and she's got some of the best technique in the world. But when you're talking about with remote people and everything, so I try to get them to my way, and it just didn't work at first. So almost like I want to say you have to meet them in the middle. So you have your way of doing stuff, and you have the way that they've been conditioned to. And I just for look little small improvements that I need to, like, okay, like this is the current way you're benching. It's been successful. Let's just make a few minor changes here. Or, hey, you're benching with your elbows out, and even though you're successful, we got to change this a little bit because you will not last long. Your shoulders and your pecs, it's only a matter of time, especially as you get older and you're really pressing the heavy weights. So it's just basically meeting them in the middle from the way I want them to be and the way they're at, and find out the best possible way to do stuff on there. As far as the best positions, the best stances for them, the best elbow positions on stuff, whether they're pulling conventional or sumo. Working on their weaknesses. I'm big on, I got this from Louis Simmons, assistance work. You got to pick out special exercises like the Dynamo Club did for their Soviet style of lifting. And Piros Dimas, when he was with his first system that he brought up, a lot of assistance work before you get like the Bulgarian system, before you specialize and narrow it down to higher intensity, high volume training with just the lifts themselves. But I pick out a lot of assistance work to help them build up those areas. So, hey, if we're going to deadlift this way, or hey, if we're going to bench this way, or this is the most optimal way for you. Here's the stuff that we need to pick out and do in order to bring the total body up.
And how do you find that it differs from? I mean, you talk about kind of like technical changes, meeting people in the middle, but so when you coach someone in person, do you find there are a lot of changes that you make on the fly? I mean, because obviously long-term programming is kind of tough to do. I mean, thinking about where someone's going to be in a month or 6 months, like you can probably get pretty close to the mark, but there are a lot of day-to-day fluctuations. And if someone personally who works in a weightlifting club, we can make calls on the fly and make changes and maybe take weights again or do those subtle things that make training just that little bit more effective. Now, when you're working with someone remotely, do you find that your programming system has to change at all, or do you think you're pretty close to the mark with regards to what you send them, how they execute? Do you use a lot of like RPE and auto regulation like that, or percentage work? I mean, what's your general philosophy with programming and remote athletes?
Yeah, Josh, that's why I like talking to you, because you get it where you have a plan or you have a workout for the day, but like you just said with your own, you're adjusting on the fly, you're taking weights again, hey, let's hit that, even though we're supposed to go up to this, but let's hit this a little bit better for the day, or maybe you have to do several singles. So I'm glad you brought that up from your end, and I'm glad to hear that from a coach. But yeah, there is a big difference because you don't get to see videos till later on. You don't get to see videos till the next day, or maybe you didn't, you missed it, and you have your own stuff going on during the day, and you can't comment it on till later. So yes, absolutely. Like people that say, "Oh, I've got my annual training plan and mesocycles and macro cycles and everything else." Yeah, those are good to have, and I guess with the online system, like I run a little bit more of those, so people have time to adapt to it. But when you're in front of me, yeah, I make changes right then and there. Like Shelby Miles, we're getting ready for this last meet. We had to switch up her bench technique a little bit. We had to switch up her deadlift technique. She wasn't keeping the bar very close, and I was wanting to run a lot of reverse band deadlifts, which overload her, so she can handle heavier weights at the top for her lockout. But that wasn't the case. She wasn't keeping the bar close off the bottom, so I had to run some pause deadlifts where she was bringing the bar an inch off the ground and holding it before she was exploding back up in her lifts. And we needed to do that for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then she kept the bar really close, and then I went into overloads. Where somebody else who you and I were just talking about, if we're running stuff on there, maybe we don't see that right away. Or it's like, well, I still want to run another week on this. Let's see if this works out. And you can only leave so many comments or call them up at so many times, with schedules and everything variable. So I guess when you're in front of me, I absolutely make changes on the fly because you see stuff as a coach. Put down the Excel spreadsheets, look at your athletes, coach them up from there, have your idea and your plan for the day of what you're planning on, but adjust. And I mean, I constantly do that. We've never had a training cycle, and I'm sure you can speak of this, that went 100% according to plan. I've never had one myself. I've never had an athlete like that, go 100%. There's always changes you have to make. But like you said, with the age that we're living in and with the online system, I try to make changes as best I can. I try to get to my lifters' videos as quickly as I can and talk to them as much, but it's hard. I just try to make it as best one-on-one training as you can, but there's still a time difference. There's still, only so much you can do from a computer and a screen and a phone call or a text.
Yeah. So is there a reason why you went down the kind of like high school strength and conditioning route versus, a traditional kind of gym where you maybe it's like powerlifting focused and you can kind of dedicate all of your time to that? Is it just because you wanted to work with kids earlier on and help kind of with their development versus, having a gym where it's just kind of whoever walks in off the street?
Yeah. My first coach, Mr. Gary Conj, and my second coach, Vic Voinovich, they changed my lives. They did this all for free when, my parents couldn't afford a year-round training like this. My parents did a great job. They're working middle class, and there's no way the training I got in the individual stuff, there's no way if you paid them per hour, that would have happened. So they changed my complete, life on everything from my wrestling to my lifting to my coaching and everything like that. And it's my way of giving back for the rest of my life because they made me successful with stuff I never would have gotten to do. I was a little bit introverted on some stuff. I never would have gotten to travel the world around like I did and meet the lifters and have the success I had and, do all the strength conditioning stuff. And I went the college route. I was at volunteered at a couple Division I schools, volunteered at some Division II and Division III colleges as well. But in the back of my mind, I even did some NFL work. In 2007, I got hooked up with the Cleveland Browns for a little bit. So I got to go in and do some volunteer work for them as well. But it just solidified my mind. Like when I looked at it and what I really wanted to do, I'm like, hey, I've done the college stuff. This was great. And, helping these athletes, but I really wanted to be around the high school kids. It's just because I knew the impact that those coaches had on me. And I was still having a great impact on my college kids. And I still do, the ones that come see me individually. But I just knew I kind of wanted to be down here. But it's nice when those kids come back when they're in college right now. I got some of my track runners. I got a kid, his dad joked around and was hoping his kid could be varsity by the time he's a junior or senior. And this kid ended up getting a scholarship and going to state and almost placing state in hurdles from his weight room work. And he still comes to see me for this various day. And he knows that as stronger he gets, he runs faster, he does better. And, he travels an hour, 4 times a week to see me, because we're trying to finish up his senior year and get him qualified for the NCAAs and everything. So it's just when you have that relationship and those kids built on. And now I've got some open lifters from their 20s and 30s, and I got some masters lifters. Same thing. They're just very dedicated. It's just amazing what you can do with them and help out. But I do gravitate towards the younger kids. But now I've gotten the fact where it's kind of been a challenging, like you said, people come to you with, they're in their 20s, they've built motor patterns that, we kind of have to adjust and figure out the best way to optimize it, with the amount of time they have and everything. It's been a great challenge for me and working with the masters lifters and especially with their recovery and helping them get to the best level on here too.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like and I could be wrong, but it sounds like your entire life is pretty much like powerlifting and just getting people stronger and making them better athletes, frankly. I mean, is that something where it's like that's kind of all you do, all you focus on, all you can think about? I mean, I don't know how you get removed from that when you have, kids you work with daily, you have, open athletes, you have masters athletes. Like it sounds like that's kind of your entire world.
Yeah, no, it's hard to get removed because then I set up a garage gym in my house with all COVID and everything closing stuff down, and my high school is only limited. I can only have high school kids in my high school weight room now. So no, I don't get tired of it. It's what I gravitate towards, and I guess it's still in the back of my mind. I know how much a difference those coaches made for me, and the other coaches that came after them, and the people that invested their time into me. A lot of them did this for free. Especially at that era time. Now it's a little bit different. With the way people are and stuff. And obviously I charge for my time too, but I would never turn away a kid who couldn't afford it or somebody else that, I've had several athletes and several masters lifters during COVID. They, some financial stuff came up and it doesn't matter. You're still going to train. We'll figure that stuff out when you get it later. But yeah, but for me as outside hobbies, I guess definitely getting away. I love the outdoors, man. I got to get away from stuff for a little bit. That's for sure. There's certain times that I need a break. Like Shelby just got done with her meet, competing in Michigan. 22 years old, 200-pound body weight, squatted 418 for me raw, bench pressed the all-time junior record of 292 pounds with a pause. Yeah, she benched over 300 pounds touch and go. 22-year-old girl, 200-pound body weight. And we just pulled a solid 486. God, it looks like she's close to 500 now on her deadlift. It's just like stuff like that. But she's taking her, kind of break where she's just going to train twice this week and twice next week. So I kind of follow her schedule a little bit too. So I personally get a little bit of a break, kind of mine. So I kind of plan my stuff around my lifters almost. So, but it's just, that's just the way it is. But I make sure to take time, and I didn't do that a lot early on in my career, but I make sure I have some separation with that. I have some other people that help me out with my coaching and that I've opened up and learned to delegate a little bit more too. So it's been a good help. But yeah, you definitely got to remove yourself from it. But it's hard because it's what I do and what I love all the time.
Yeah, and I know a topic we did want to touch on just because I think the biggest name in powerlifting is Louis Simmons. You could probably go up to 10 people and 9 out of 10 would say, yeah, I know who Louis is, or I know what West Side is. And maybe they don't know the details. I don't think a lot of people do. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding his system and how he's developed it.
Yep.
But with that being said, I mean, it's obvious that his system was developed and catered towards people who were and still are lifting in gear. Within a gym setting, right? Everyone comes to his gym. It's that whole environment he set up where people don't pay memberships and people are constantly competing and really pushing themselves. And the flack he really gets is like, that system isn't made for raw powerlifting. And I'm interested in talking to you about it because you came up, you lifted, you said you lifted in gear, but you've also coached a lot of people who are raw, and you use a lot of his principles, I guess. So how have you taken the West Side system? And obviously you've been influenced by a lot more people and a lot of other coaches and a lot of other information, but how have you applied West Side lifting to the USAPL and to raw powerlifting?
Yeah, well, first, I mean, I was in single ply gear and those guys were in multi ply, but I applied a lot of this to mine. And as I went through and I started, especially when I got in the open and stuff, I knew I needed to practice the lifts more, where Louis was very big on box squatting. I needed to practice the actual lifts. And I found that out, especially as I got older. And I had some other coaches around me like Sherman and Wade and some of the foreign coaches, the Japanese coaches I worked with on the bench press because they were the most technical. They weren't the strongest, but they were the most technical lifters. And I learned a lot from them just on the world teams. Detmar Wolf from Norway, learned a lot about how he programmed his coming from an Olympic lifting background in his powerlifting. So one thing I learned from him, even though I was in single ply gear and a different way of lifting, I guess, versus the multi-ply guys, I practice a lot more in my lifts. I practice more closely related assistance work. And, I still kept my box squats in because those always seem to help my deadlift. I think coming from that static position, overcoming by dynamic, which is, a Louis principle on there, that always seemed to help my deadlift. But I knew I needed to squat raw. I knew I needed to squat with limited gear on too to actually learn how to get better. And that's something that I took from Wade Hooper and a few other guys, and Ed Cohen too, who was influenced as well. So it was just adapting his system. And then before meets, I would practice more of it, where Louis is, he's big on not deadlifting and training assistance work where, that helped for a little bit because it really brought up my weak points. And one thing I learned from all the old school powerlifters is not to deadlift. And that's one thing that Vince Anello, who was one of the greatest deadlifters of all time, said. He goes, looking at his career, he goes, he wished he wouldn't have deadlifted as much. And talking with Ed Cohen and a few other lifters, is they trained a lot of variant stances. Larry Pacifico was another great powerlifter, and they just did a lot of sumos, a lot of conventionals, a lot of modified, standing on blocks. So even though they were deadlifting, they were doing variations year round, not just deadlifting. So, I did a little bit more deadlifting than what Louis had recommended, but like Vince said, don't over deadlift. That was one thing he said that kind of ended his career. It's the most taxing exercise. It is. And that's why I always put at the end of my training, when I'm training people or myself, it's always the last lift of the week, because I always want to be in a fatigue state. And I learned that from Olympic lifters. All Bulgarians were always training in a fatigue state. Zygmunt, Caleb Williams is a friend of mine. When he trained under him, the U.S. national coach, Zygmunt had a lot of his lifters in the U.S. always trained in a fatigue state, and he came from the Polish lifting system. So I think from there, and I think now is, The only difference with my raw lifters, to answer your second question, what I do differently with them is they're still, Louis recommends the 3 to 4 week wave cycles, where you build up and lift for 3 to 4 weeks and come down. I don't do as much speed work now. I will do that when I see my lifters in their off season, they need to gain some speed back, or they're going through some technical changes. I'll give you an example. Like when I'm running speed squats and I want my lifters just to focus on one or two things, not sit there and like, hey, you got to keep your chest up more. Hey, you're bottoming out in the bottom. Your knees are coming. No, I want you to focus on one or two things. It's great for conditioning. I think it's great for GPP at that time. But I just don't use the box as much as I did, when I was Louis. I practice the competition lifts more. Trying to think what else. I do a lot more deadlift variations where Louis does a lot more good morning work. A lot of other stuff. The reverse hyper's there, when we use it, especially to keep your lower back healthy and traction the lower back on there. So I think I just practice the lifts a lot more, especially with the younger kids. For the raw lifting, we're still going 3 to 4 week waves, but I will do, as far as with this repetition method, we'll do that on a lot of our dumbbell work, a lot of hypertrophy work. But I guess with his, it's more closely related. We don't do a lot of the box stuff. I do more wide stance squats, more close stance squats, some box work in the off season, some speed work, but we don't keep up that year round. We seem to do better with, the heavier lifts and training them. So to answer your question, I think it's just picking and choosing that I've learned, practicing the lifts more often, especially since we're squatting very low. And I want my lifters to be the most technical lifters. And that's why after, 10 years, they're still lifting at the highest level. So I think those takes on, as to answer your question about Westside and using the principles and some of the foundations that I grew up with, but also knowing that what my lifters need best and how we're responding and doing the best.
Yeah, a couple other, concepts with Westside, and they're not exclusively Westside, but they're well known for that. You see some kind of kickback in from like coaches who are in raw powerlifting would be towards the use of accommodating resistance. So do you tend to use bands and chains often, and where do you think they fit in if they do at all?
Yeah, that's another great question with Louis, because he talks a lot about that with it right now, with, using 80% and 5x5 and using band tension. He's big on that. We will use that in the off season. The one things I do like with accommodating resistance, we'll actually do the opposite. So Shelby Miles, to give an example, she actually likes the reverse band bench press, where the bands are actually pulling the weight off your chest a little bit. And she actually, so she can handle, 350 pounds on that, 340 pounds. So she's overloading the top. We've gotten a lot of great stuff off of reverse bands. Same thing where the bands are hanging from the safeties and they're pulling the weight, but I don't do it like a lot of the Instagram people do. Okay. I actually let the weight come out the last 3 to 4 inches, so my lifters actually feel what it means to lock that weight out, whether it's for the bench press or deadlift. I don't do a lot on there. In the off season, it's funny you mentioned about accommodating resistance. Shelby, we really hammered the bottom of her squat, and she looked phenomenal. But we're having trouble as far as with some heavier weights at the top. So in her off season, I will give her some more chain work on there. I don't do a lot of bands with her squat. I do like a lot of chains because they don't really take away from, the bands will pull you in a straight line, which is sometimes good for some people who actually need to learn to, have that linear path in some of their lifts. But I like chains in the off season. I don't like them as we get closer to meets because you're handling straight weight. And that's one mistake that I made in my early career was I was getting a lot of stuff out of bands and chains, but I was also young and, I was just coming up. So I was making some great progress. But as I got towards meets, taking those off really started to kind of mess with, just that pattern I had. So I make sure that my lifters, I guess if you had to ask me, we'll cut that out probably the last couple months before a meet, when they go into like their pre-training and their actual training cycle. But in the off season, I do like putting some band tension on there. I do like putting some chains on there. I just don't do it as frequently or as often as Louis recommends it.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess another Westside concept, or at least something that they use quite a bit, is GPP work just year round, right? Because it's conjugate. It's meant to focus on different qualities. I know you talked a lot about the sled dragging and a lot of that stuff with respect to the younger athletes. But when you have someone like Shelby, who's much more advanced, does she still see a lot of kind of general work capacity work? And when does that kind of fit into her training plan?
Yeah, that awesome question there. See, and that's where I play around with it, because right now she will do sled work still, and she does a lot of strongman work, which has really helped her out. I love strongman training, especially in the off season. And I'm telling you right now, if you just squat, bench, and deadlift, you are going to beat your lifters down, just like the old lifters said. Even Bill Kazmaier said he bench pressed too much, even though Bill was the first guy ever to bench press 300 kilograms, 660 pounds in a lifting meet. Yeah. A lot of those guys, you look at their shoulder injuries and you look at the stuff they have now. So I like giving my kids athletic lifts, but not too far away. So when I like doing it is Shelby's going to train like twice a week for the next 2 weeks after her meet. And then we'll kind of get back into some high bar close stance squats, some Olympic squats, honestly. We're not going to arch on the bench press anymore. We're going to do flat back. We're going to let full range of motion give her lower back a little bit of a break. Say I have her maybe do some speed squats. Well, afterwards, I'm going to have her drag some sled. That is great. If you drag sled backward, that will actually traction your lower back. She even talks about how good it is. And, it's fun to keep them switching up, if you want to talk about grip work and upper back work and quad work, really try doing some farmer's walks. He was handling well over 500 pounds for trips back and forth on, I think we're up to 150 feet without putting anything down. So I like that stuff when we don't have a meet coming up. We don't have anything specific for a long period of time. But I still like to keep her lifts, and she'll still squat. But instead of doing like another squat or more glute ham raises or lunges or something else where I'm just beating them down and compressing their spine completely, I give them something simple and a challenge over there. I raise their GPP up. I let them get in condition again. I want to keep them still athletic, and that's what's kept my lifters very healthy throughout all the years at competing at such a high level. So it's not like I give them CrossFit or anything like that where they're going to put themselves in bad position, but it's a good challenge. With the whole COVID and us, Shelby not being able to go to Worlds and Jenica and a few others, it was good for them giving different challenges. Like, hey, maybe we hit a rep PR on bench. Okay. But, now we got some different shoulder press routines we're going to do that we normally don't hit. I do a lot of shoulders in the off season too. It takes away from your bench press when you're getting ready towards a meet. But I think, shoulder injuries are common in bench pressers. So I build the shoulder girdle up. I build that whole area up. A lot of military presses, front raises, side raises. But I'm obviously very careful about that when we're getting towards a meet and Shelby's benching, 2 main lifts a week plus a closely related assistance work. So we do all that stuff. A lot of upper back training for Shelby, that keeps her shoulders healthy. So I fit that in when we don't have a meet coming up, when there's plenty of time. And when I see the need that they need to get their conditioning up, they need to get their athleticism back in.
Yeah, that's interesting because like at least the group or the circle of people I was involved with, you kind of saw this swing towards being hyper specific with everything. It's like squat, bench, deadlift, comp style, comp racks, comp equipment, all of that. And then it's funny listening to a lot of the West Side stuff because it's, such little time is designated to squat, bench, and deadlift. And then even with you talking about just not necessarily getting away from bench press, but just developing better athletes so they can be better powerlifters. So people who are generally more muscular, generally stronger, generally more physically capable.
Yes.
Is that something you've always thought needs to happen? Or did you find yourself like moving things around and just giving people more of like a true off season tended to help?
I just looked at all the athletics around me. You look at a boxer just doesn't get in there and fight. He's doing heavy bag, he's doing speed bag, he's getting up and running, he's jumping rope, he's lifting weights, he's sparring, he's doing head movements. He's got all these things to become a better boxer from wrestling training. These guys just don't get in there and wrestle every single day and just go live. They're drilling, they're going to camps, they're going to clinics, they're lifting, they're conditioning, they're running. They're doing all these things to get better at wrestling. And I know the Bulgarians, obviously they have their own, and there's controversy that we can get on a whole other topic with them. But, with that, I just looked at it and said, all right, if I want to develop the overall powerlifter, I want them to be athletic. I want them to be strong. I want them to be versatile all around. Like I told you, Shelby goes through a couple training cycles a year where we put Olympic lifts back in. The overhead squat's great. I think the flexibility from there. I love the front squat. She does close stance like that year round. As much as the hamstrings are important, she still needs some quad work. So close stance, front squats are a great position. And that is a tremendous upper back builder. Brad Gillingham really hammered those. Brad Gillingham has the most 800-pound deadlifts. I think it's actually honestly over 50 800-pound recorded free deadlifts in competition. And he's been around. He still competes as a master's lifter. And Brad was big on those for developing the upper back for, just general thoracic area for all lifts. So we put those in it. And that's the first thing. It's not your legs that give out. It's always the upper back and the lifter. So I think that's a great upper back. You can sit there and do all the face pulls and dumbbell work you want, which are great. But try some real heavy front squats and see what happens to your upper back and what gives out first. That will truly develop the strength needed up there.
Yeah. This is This is awesome because this is exactly the changes I've been starting to incorporate with the way I program is even getting further removed from the actual lift and saying, hey, let's do some shrugs, let's do some good mornings. And for weightlifting, it's different because people think because it's more technical, you need to do it more often. But I found, once you really have the technique down, you're just not going to get quite as much further refining your technique as you could if you were just stronger and bigger and then kind of got more familiar with the lifts. It's like the snatch isn't going to get you stronger at the snatch. Snatch, deadlift, back squat, shrugs, all of these exercises that build up certain areas and contribute to building muscle and building strength. That's going to have more carryover once you're, a little
Yeah.
bit more advanced.
Think about the first time you walked in and deadlifted, Josh. What made you? If I don't know what you pulled, whatever, but it was from all your different training, all your different stuff, your athletic background, all the work you did that enables you to deadlift that. Genetics, we can go on and on with the list, but it was all your background stuff that made you able to do that. And that's what I look at with everything else, especially in the off season for them. Again, like we're still going to squat, but I'm going to give you high bar close stance for a while. That actually puts my lifters in a better vertical position. Man, does that develop your traps too? Your traps are sore as crap if you've been doing low bar for a long time. If you're doing feet up bench press with your back flat, man, your shoulders have got a longer range of motion. It develops everything that's been in there. You've already beaten that part up. If you've been pulling sumo like Shelby has for the last, 6-7 weeks, I need to give her some conventional. She needs to build up her lower back, build up her quads, and change the motor pattern up. That's where my philosophy is sometimes different from others. Is like I want my lifters to kind of pull similar. There can be a little bit of difference, no doubt, but I want them to be able to pull similar, conventional or sumo. Or you got a weak link in your system. If you look at all the Chinese, look at all the bodybuilding they do. Look at all the variation of exercises that they have. Even though they practice the lifts heavy, I see those guys bodybuilding at least 1 or 2 times a week. Zygmunt, the national team coach for weightlifting, if you look at the old Polish videos, they were training athletes. If you look at the old Dynamo Club, Vasil Alexiev, Dave Ridger, all those great Olympic lifters that I freaking love, they were all doing a lot of their own assistance work in addition to training more. The great Vasil Alexiev said, he goes, sometimes my Russian coaches, he said this in an article that's posted on Elite FTS, he goes, if they missed a jerk, some of the coaches thought that they should jerk more, where Vasil Alexiev said that wasn't always the case, that I needed more volume and work capacity, was maybe I needed to develop the muscles around the jerk. So those were great things. Again, I took from Olympic weightlifters, that champions that said, yes, that could be the case, but I also found out training the muscles around it, which is one of my, base level philosophies, is also great and a good way of doing it, where some people don't believe that.
So if we were to have, say, 20 weeks before a competition, so say Shelby just finished competing, crushed it, and then you have the 2 weeks where it's really just varied training, easy, just kind of more of like a transition or active rest period. When does she start putting in the competition lift? When is she going to see a competition squat, a competition bench, a competition deadlift, if she's got like this long span of time between 2 meets?
Good. And this has changed as she's gotten to another level, because even this time around, I've given her more intensity on her lifts, where before I used to give her more reps as a younger athlete because she needed more practice. She needed more development. Her, as 3 years ago, 5 sets of one, that's not going to do much for her. But now that she's at a higher level, world level, 5 sets of one with over 90%, that's going to do some work where she's going to have to struggle for those. So if we're talking 20 weeks out, she's got a 2-week transition period right now. We're just going to train twice a week. And then from there, I'm going to give her I'm going to have her do some bodybuilding, some different machines, get stuff off her spine. I'm going to have her do some more reverse hypers. I'm not going to put any sled work or anything in like that yet, but she's going to have the feet up on the bench press. We're going to hit some incline, some decline. And I'm going to ask her a few things that she wants to do too. What's a couple things that you want to do? And from there, okay, like, hey, we're going to start arching on our bench press with our feet up. So that way she learns to get some stability back in her shoulders. I take the knee sleeves off. I take her weightlifting shoes off because she squats in a heel. I have her squat in a flat-soled shoe. I make her do some more ankle mobility on there. That's like, hey, okay, we're getting, 3 months away from the meet, so we're going to start arching a little bit. Okay, we're going to start putting our feet down. Hey, let's start practicing sumo a little bit. Let's get in a regular stance. From there, once she gets that kind of back in order, I might have her do one thing that's helped her with her hips and her hamstrings, a wide stance deadlift. So what I'll do is I'll put collars on the bar and then plates, so she can get her feet actually wider than normal. Yep. And that, if you want to talk about something it's going to shorten the distance, okay? So she knows she can pull a little bit more than her regular stance, but we'll develop the hips from there. If she was struggling with her quad strength for a little bit, and I'm not a big quad guy, but you need them especially for raw powerlifting. So besides the close stance front squats and the high bar close stance over there, the conventional deadlifts were helping her out a little bit too. So I really put those into play. But we also did close stance sumo. Just like you have a close grip bench press, a wide grip bench, pinky on the rings, I do the same thing with my deadlift training. She was getting slow off the ground, so I had her stand on. When we talk about accommodating resistance, I had her put some chains on because she knows she needs to pull it fast when you have the chains on there, or you will get stuck halfway. And I just put her on, elevated stuff. I wanted her a little bit longer range of motion. Then as we're getting closer to a meet, maybe I'll take the conventional deadlifts away, the close stance sumo away. We'll start going to her regular competition lifts. 80% of her set up on her bench press. She does a lot of close grip training. For Shelby, the close grip bench press will transfer when she goes into a wide grip bench press. But a lot of wide grip benching does not transfer into close grip because it's such a short range of motion. For chest work, this is one thing that Shelby's now freaking blasting weights off her chest. Before, that was her sticking point. To contradict that, one thing we did was illegal wide grips where we had index finger outside of the rings. Because if you look at chest stuff, you look it up, and a lot of the kids that come to me, it's all dumbbell work and flies. And dumbbell benches are great. Shelby handles over 100-pound dumbbells for sets and reps, no problem. But what is going to be more specific to the bench press to develop the chest? It's going to be a little bit wider grip. Close grip develops the triceps more. So at the same time, she might have a super close grip day. Say we're about 3 months out. And then the next day she benches, she's going to go ultra wide, illegal wide grips to develop her chest. Sets and reps on there, high volume training on that has really helped her out because she's going wide grip with a short distance. So we found that 4s, 5s, and 6s have been really good to develop her chest on there. And then we start getting more into competition mode. Then we kind of have like a 2-week transition period where we're pretty focused on stuff. And then, man, by the last 5 or 6 weeks, we are hammered down to, all right, we're going to go in there and here's our routine that we're going to do. And just like you, when you coach people, Josh, sometimes you're going to change stuff and make them repeat some weights. Or there were 2 or 3 times during the training cycle the last 6 weeks, it did not go as planned. So we had to take a step back. I'm like, all right, I want you to hit this lower weight, but I want you to hit it good. I'm like, okay, shut it down. That's it. We'll save it for next week.
I mean, that's crazy. I think it's so different from what I'm used to hearing because I guess the circle you kind of get caught in, changes the way you think about training, but just the variety of exercises, different hand placements, foot placement. I mean, you can change. It sounds like you change everything and anything as long as it, has a purpose, right? It's not like you
exactly. Yep.
As long as
it has a purpose. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's not like you just say do wide grip to do wide grip. And you can do that. That's fine because maybe you find some transfer or carryover. Maybe it does something that sometimes that's just what happens. You're like, hey, let's see what happens. Let's do wide grip, and then suddenly the bench skyrockets, and you're like, okay, that's a tool in the toolbox. But I think that's the mindset with training, and that's like the long term mindset with training is a strict press feeds into a push press, which feeds into a push jerk, which feeds in, or like with bench, flat back, feet up, arch feet up, arch feet down, different grip. And then it's just interesting to hear that kind of from another coach in another sport, because it's, makes me think that maybe I should try varying things a little bit more.
Yeah, I just think it gives a breath. And Josh, this is when I learned from talking with a lot of the foreign coaches too, because they said you've already, why would you go back in and start arching stuff? It's a mental thing. It's still benching. It's like when you get in there, you're like, oh my God, my shoulders from all the years, the last 2 or 3 months of arching hard, and now I'm flat back. Man, my shoulders are wrecked, but in a good way. It's because muscles haven't been worked. And Josh, you as well as I know, if you keep working the same motor patterns and those certain lifters that are, stronger in their quads or stronger over here, those muscles keep getting stronger. The other ones keep getting left behind until something pulls, something tweaks, something keeps bothering them over and over again. And I don't want to deal with that as much as I can. So I think developing all those small muscle groups and doing the high bar close stand squats, switching the deadlifts up, those other muscles get a chance to come up. The other ones that you already know what you're good at. I keep practicing that. Focus on the stuff you're not good at.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. And I know you're about to get back to work, so we'll kind of wrap it up here. But Jeremy, I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge. You have time in the sport, time coaching, time competing. Where can people find you if they want to either learn more about you, have a chat with you, or get some coaching from you?
Yeah, just look up Jeremy Hartman and Hartman Performance. That's where all my social media stuff is, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Just look up Hartman Performance Training, HPT. You guys can find that. Shoot me an email, Hartman, Hartman, PT1 @gmail.com. Message me on any of those. I'm happy to talk to lifters and people all the time about stuff. And, whatever we can do to help people get stronger, it's always a great thing. And it's a blessing when people, when you get to have that conversation, just like we're talking to you. I learned a lot just by talking your stuff, Josh, before you and I even got on here. It was great to hear from another coach, and I loved hearing your perspectives and stuff that you run into. And, it's been good all around. So hit me up on any of the social media channels that are out there. I'm sure you can find it. I'd be glad to help anybody out.
Yep. And thanks, guys, for tuning in to another episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. You can find me on Instagram at Josh_PhilWL. That's PhilWL. You can find me at Joshua Gibson on Facebook. And we will catch you guys on the next episode of the podcast.